There's a profound stillness that settles over those who glimpse behind the veil of ordinary existence. A silence so deep it makes the world's endless chatter seem like distant thunder. If you found yourself here, wrestling with questions that have no easy answers, you may have encountered something that Carl Jung knew intimately: the paradox of awakening. You thought spiritual growth would make you unstoppable. Instead, it left you sitting in meditation rooms, wondering why nothing feels urgent anymore. The hustle culture that once drove you now feels like watching children play with toys you've outgrown. Jung called this the confrontation with the transcendent function. That moment when consciousness expands beyond the narrow confines of ego-driven ambition. It's not depression, though it might feel similar. It's not laziness, though productivity gurus would disagree. It's something far more profound and infinitely more challenging to navigate. Picture a river that has always rushed toward the sea, suddenly finding itself emptying into a vast, still lake. The urgency stops. The direction becomes unclear. This is your psyche after awakening, no longer driven by unconscious compulsions, but not yet aligned with conscious purpose. For years, you operated from what Jung termed the provisional life, that state where external achievements masked internal emptiness. Your motivation came from running away from yourself, not toward something meaningful. Spiritual awakening strips away these illusions, leaving you naked before the mirror of your own soul. The world suddenly feels different when you realize that most of human striving is sleepwalking. That promotion you desperately wanted? It loses its shine when you understand it won't fill the void it promised to heal. The relationship you thought would complete you. It reveals itself as another attempt to avoid the work of becoming whole. Jung understood that true individuation, the process of becoming who you really are, requires a death of sorts. The death of the false self that society applauded. The death of motivations that were never truly yours. This dying feels like losing motivation because, in a sense, you are. But here's what the self-help industry won't tell you about spiritual awakening. It's supposed to disorient you, supposed to make you question everything you thought you wanted. This confusion isn't a bug in the system. It's the feature that separates authentic transformation from spiritual bypassing. You're not broken because you can't get excited about arbitrary deadlines anymore. You're not lazy because networking events feel like performance art. You're experiencing what mystics throughout history have described as the dark night of the soul. That necessary passage between who you were and who you're becoming. Jung wrote extensively about this liminal space, this threshold between worlds. He called it the nigredo, the blackening, the decomposition of old forms before new ones can emerge. Like a snake shedding its skin, there's a period where you're neither the old creature nor the new one. The motivation you've lost wasn't really motivation at all. It was compulsion dressed up in acceptable clothes. Fear of not being enough, driving you to prove your worth through endless achievement. Shame about your ordinariness, pushing you to become extraordinary at any cost. These aren't inspiring forces. They're prisons with motivational posters on the walls. Real motivation, the kind Jung associated with the individuation process, doesn't feel like the frantic energy you remember. It feels more like gravity, pulling you toward your authentic expression with quiet certainty. It doesn't scream, it whispers. It doesn't demand, it invites. This is why your old goals feel hollow now. They weren't aligned with your soul's purpose. They were bandages on your ego's wounds. Spiritual awakening removes the bandages, and suddenly you're bleeding in ways that success was supposed to prevent. The shadow work begins here, in this space between ambitions. Jung knew that we must face the parts of ourselves we've buried beneath socially acceptable personas. That high achiever you became looked deeper. What pain was it medicating? What unworthiness was it trying to prove wrong? You discovered that your motivation was often powered by unresolved trauma, by the part of you that believed it had to earn love through performance. Awakening dissolves these unconscious contracts with suffering, leaving you momentarily directionless but ultimately free. Freedom, however, is terrifying to a psyche that has known only the comfortable prison of external validation. Without the carrot of achievement dangling before you, without the stick of failure driving you forward, you must learn to move from an entirely different place within yourself. Jung called this different place the self, not the ego self that seeks approval, but the deeper self that seeks expression. This self doesn't need motivation in the traditional sense, because it is motivation. It's the creative force that moves through you when you stop trying so hard to move it. But the transition is brutal. There's a period where you're caught between worlds, no longer driven by unconscious compulsions, but not yet aligned with conscious purpose. You're like a compass spinning wildly between magnetic poles, searching for true north. During this time, everything feels meaningless because the old meaning-making structures have crumbled. Your career, your relationships, your goals, they all appear through new eyes that see their provisional nature. This isn't nihilism. It's spiritual renovation, and renovation always looks like destruction before it looks like creation. The people around you don't understand. They see your decreased ambition as depression or laziness. They offer advice about goal setting and productivity hacks, not realizing you're undergoing a fundamental restructuring of consciousness. Their solutions feel like trying to restart a computer that's in the middle of a complete operating system upgrade. Jung experienced this himself during his confrontation with the unconscious, that period of psychological crisis that led to his most profound insights. He stopped functioning in conventional ways, spending years exploring his inner world through active imagination, dream analysis, and deep introspection. His colleagues thought he was having a breakdown. In reality, he was having a breakthrough, one that would revolutionize psychology and offer a roadmap for others, making the same treacherous journey from ego consciousness to soul consciousness. The key insight Jung discovered is that this death of motivation isn't permanent, it's transitional. Like a forest fire that clears away undergrowth to make room for new growth. The burning away of false motivations creates space for authentic purpose to emerge. But this emergence requires patience, something our instant gratification culture has trained us to avoid. You can't rush individuation any more than you can rush the seasons. There's a natural rhythm to psychological transformation that doesn't conform to productivity timelines. During this waiting period, Jung recommended what he called holding the tension of opposites. Neither forcing action nor surrendering to inaction, but remaining consciously present to the discomfort of not knowing what comes next. This is perhaps the most difficult spiritual practice of all. You learn to sit with uncertainty without immediately reaching for distraction. You resist the urge to manufacture motivation through caffeine and self-help books, understanding that synthetic drive only delays authentic emergence. You become comfortable with being temporarily uncomfortable. This doesn't mean becoming passive. It means learning to distinguish between ego-driven action and soul-guided movement. The former feels forced, anxious, urgent. The latter feels natural, flowing, inevitable. One depletes you, the other sustains you. The challenge is that soul-guided action often looks like nothing to the external world. It might be long walks in nature, journaling, meditation, deep conversations, creative expression without commercial intent. These activities don't produce tangible results, so society deems them unproductive. But Jung understood that this apparent non-action is actually the most productive phase of psychological development. It's the soil preparation that precedes authentic flowering. You're not being lazy. You're composting old patterns to nourish new growth. Your anxiety about lost motivation is understandable but misplaced. It's like a caterpillar worrying about its inability to crawl while it's dissolving in the chrysalis. The old form of locomotion is gone because a completely different form of movement is being born. This metamorphosis happens in its own time, according to its own wisdom. You can't speed it up through effort. but you can certainly slow it down through resistance. The more you fight the process, the longer it takes. The more you trust it, the more gracefully it unfolds. Trust, however, is perhaps the most challenging aspect of this journey. How do you trust a process that feels like dissolution? How do you have faith in a transformation you can't see or control? This is where spiritual maturity begins, in the willingness to surrender to forces larger than your understanding. Jung spoke of the religious function of the psyche, not religion in the institutional sense, but religio, meaning to bind back to the sacred. This binding happens when you stop trying to direct your own awakening and allow yourself to be directed by it. The sacred doesn't operate on human timelines or conform to human expectations. It works through what appears to be emptiness, silence, and apparent non-action. Your job isn't to understand it, but to serve it, to become a vessel for its expression rather than an obstacle to its flow. This serving looks different for everyone, but it always begins with self-acceptance, accepting that you're in transition, accepting that old motivations are gone, accepting that you don't know what comes next. This acceptance isn't resignation. It's the prerequisite for rebirth. As you relax into the unknown, something miraculous begins to happen. Subtle impulses arise from deeper levels of consciousness. A desire to write, to paint, to walk in forests, to have meaningful conversations. These impulses don't feel like the old driving ambition, but they carry a different quality: authenticity. You start to move, not because you have to, but because you want to. Not because society expects it, but because your soul calls for it. This is motivation reborn. Not as compulsion, but as expression. Not as escape, but as embrace. The projects that emerge from this place have a different quality than your old achievements. They feel alive, connected to something larger than personal success. They nourish you, even when they challenge you. They align with your deepest values rather than your superficial desires. Jung called this alignment with the self the goal of individuation. It's not about becoming someone else. It's about becoming more fully yourself. It's not about finding external motivation. It's about discovering that you are motivation, that the creative force of the universe moves through you when you stop blocking it. This doesn't mean you'll never feel lost again, or that motivation will always feel effortless. The individuation process is cyclical, spiraling deeper with each revolution. You'll face periods of confusion and clarity, action and reflection, expansion and contraction. But having navigated this first great death and rebirth, you develop trust in the process. You learn to recognize the difference between spiritual emergence and psychological emergency. You become skilled at discerning when to act and when to wait, when to push and when to allow. Most importantly, you realize that the motivation you thought you'd lost was never truly yours to begin with. It belonged to a false self that had to die for your authentic self to be born. The temporary disorientation was the price of permanent liberation from unconscious compulsions. Your new relationship with motivation is more mature, more sustainable. It's not dependent on external circumstances or internal states. It flows from your connection to purpose rather than your disconnection from peace. It energizes rather than depletes, inspires rather than demands. This transformation isn't just personal, it's collective. As more individuals undergo this death and rebirth of motivation, we're witnessing a cultural shift away from achievement-based identity toward authenticity-based living. Jung predicted this shift, seeing it as necessary for humanity's psychological evolution. You're not behind in life because you've slowed down. You're ahead of the curve, pioneering a new way of being that prioritizes depth over speed, meaning over metrics, consciousness over productivity. Your temporary confusion is actually advanced spiritual technology. The world needs people who have moved beyond compulsive motivation into conscious action. We need leaders who act from wholeness rather than wounds, creators who express truth rather than seeking approval, beings who embody peace rather than performing success. Your spiritual awakening didn't kill your motivation. It killed your desperation. It didn't make you lazy. It made you conscious. It didn't break your drive. It refined it into something worthy of your soul's expression. So rest in this sacred pause between ambitions. Trust the organic intelligence that's restructuring your entire approach to living. Allow the old to die completely, so the new can be born authentically. Your lost motivation isn't lost. It's transforming into something far more beautiful than what you left behind. The path of individuation isn't about finding yourself. It's about becoming yourself. And that becoming requires periods of apparent stagnation that are actually profound gestation. Honor this process. Trust this timing. Your soul knows what it's doing, even when your mind doesn't understand. If this message touched you, comment. I choose conscious action over compulsive motion.